I've been asked to talk about 3 people from the history of seafaring that I would like to be my shipmates on an Atlantic crossing. Well, that's a tough one, isn't it? Because there's characters all over the place. So I've scratched through my library to see who are the people I would particularly find useful, or who I would really love their company. And the first one is a useful man, and it's Erling Tams, who went off into the Pacific from Norway, actually, in a boat very, very similar to my first cruising boat, only he did it in the 1930s. It was a proper Norwegian pilot cutter designed and built by Colin Archer, just like my first boat, and he had all manner of adventures. He had a dog with him called Spare Provisions, because he that's the sort of chap he was. He always liked to laugh. He had his wife, and by the time he'd finished he had children as well. And in the end, they lost the boat in the Pacific, and that was a pretty tragic finish. But the guy was absolutely not a quitter, and I just want to read you a little section from his book, The Cruise of the Teddy, which I heartily recommend if you can find a copy. And it's about what happened to him when his boat sprang a leak. Actually, she'd got too hot and her seams had opened up at the sides. It happened to my boat as well, and it's pretty frightening because the boats don't half make a lot of water. And anyway, here he is. He's out between the islands in the Pacific, and it's very, very deep water. There's no rescue, of course, no life rafts, nothing like that. So he's got to keep the boat afloat. And here he is. Teddy, as though she seemed to sense the peril, sped gallantly forward, doing surely 10 knots. The boisterous seas she pushed impatiently aside. Maria loomed ahead. This was a race against time. He's already bust his pump, so there's nothing he can do to keep the boat afloat except go for it and then beach her when he gets there. We had to make that island, or drown. I looked below and was horrified. The water had risen above the benches on the leeward side. But he doesn't give up. Although painfully aware that we had already carried more canvas than was safe, in my desperation I hauled the trysail out of the sail bunk and set it spinnaker-like to windward. It was a frantic struggle, but I succeeded, and how that sail pulled! Onward Teddy flew like a bolting racehorse. I had not the time to log her speed, but I'm convinced that she was doing 11 knots or more. Oh, she was grand. And then, after half an hour of desperate driving, he finally gets to the gap in the reef, and he thinks he's going to make it. It's looking good. Only 3 or 4 miles more and we'd be saved. We would make it if only the wind did not abate, and a fierce squall struck us. Teddy travelled all the faster for it. I couldn't help laughing. The strength of my boat occurred to me as something immensely funny. But my newborn conviction of our safety had put me off balance, and already the pass was plainly visible. Off the entrance I had a hard struggle, and when the trysail had to be stowed, then, after a heavy jibe, we shot through the foam-bordered reef passage into the smooth haven of Papeatoe Bay. And he makes it, and he saves his ship. Now, that's the sort of chap you want, isn't it? When the chips are down and everything's gone to rats and you're really worried about whether you're going to make it. And I have been there once or twice, I've got to tell you. And what you need then is a great shipmate. But, you know, life's not always like that, is it? Sometimes you're just having a good time. And this is a book by a lady called Wynne Brown, who was a pioneer aviator in the 1920s and 30s. A great woman. And she she bought herself a yacht and sailed off to Spitsbergen with a chap she hardly knew to see what it was like. She thought she'd have a change from aviating, so she did. And this is her book, Duffys on the Deep. Wonderful boat she's got. And she gets herself into a really bad storm in the Greenland Sea, but rather than explain like Teddy the heroics that she went to survive it, she simply says, well, we went into our bunks, hung on tight and hoped for the best. And they composed a song, she and this paid hand that she's got, who turned out to be perhaps not a paid hand. In fact, I think they got intimate. And here she is. She's singing a song to the tune of I've got my love to keep me warm, but she's changed love to rum. The wind is blowing, the snow is snowing, but we will weather the storm. No matter how much it may storm, we've got some rum to keep us warm. A fun person, that's what you need on a boat. And Wynne Adams, as she became, because she married the guy in the end, and they had a family. And I met her on Poole Quay many years later. Now, the third shipmate I'm going to describe is not a real person at all. He's a character from Joshua Slocum's book. Now, everybody's heard of Joshua Slocum. Not that many people have actually read his book, which is a pity because it is an absolutely great read. And in this little extract that I'm going to share with you, Joshua Slocum gets a shipmate he wasn't expecting, because he was on his own on the boat all the time, wasn't he? But on one occasion, he was in the Azores, and he was about to sail from the Azores. In fact, he did sail. And the night before he sailed, as many of us do, he'd made a bit of a beast of himself. He'd had some cheese and he'd had some fruit and all sorts of things, and he wasn't sure about the fruit, but he had it anyway. And the first night out on passage, he was sick as a rat. He was just desperate. He was in real pain with stomach cramps, and he was throwing up and everything else. And he didn't know what to do with himself. So he set the boat on course, as he did, and he went and lay down on the saloon floor. And as he was lying there, he saw a man in the cockpit. One may imagine it, my astonishment as he grasped the spokes of my wheel, holding them as in a vice. His rig was that of a foreign sailor, and the large red cap he wore was cockbilled over his left ear, and all was set off with shaggy black whiskers. Slocum thought he might be a pirate who'd boarded him to do him some damage. But this was not the case. "Signor," said he, doffing his cap, "I have come to do you no harm. I have sailed free," he said, "but was never worse than a contrabandista. I am one of Columbus's crew. I am the pilot of the Pinta, come to aid you. Lie quiet, Senior Captain," he added, "and I will guide your ship tonight." And he did. Slocum passed out, reasonably at peace with himself. The ship roared on through the night, and occasionally he'd wake up and he'd see the man standing there at the helm. And one time he said, "Yonder is the Pinta ahead. The Pinta, we must overtake her. Give her sail, give her more sail. Vale, vale, muy vale." And then he says, "You did wrong, Captain, to mix cheese with plums. White cheese is never safe unless you know whence it comes. Quien sabe? It might have been from leche de capra, and becoming capricious, avast there," cried Joshua Slocum. "I have no time for moralising." And so the pilot shut up, and Slocum passed out again. But the next thing he knew, the pilot was singing. And he sang this song, which has stuck in my mind ever since. And I've always thought, if I was out ever in those waters, which I've been many times in bad weather, I've always thought about the pilot of the Pinta and wondered whether he was just sharing half a thought for me too. Here's his song. "High are the waves, fierce gleaming. High is the tempest roar. High is the seabird screaming. High the Azore." And those of us who've seen the majesty of Pico rise through the clouds after a passage of maybe 20 days when we've seen nothing at all, that's one of the great landfalls of all time, and somehow Slocum has captured it for us there. It's great. So these are three shipmates that I'll never have, I guess. But you know, I've had some grand ones. And what I would say is this, that those shipmates you've got, and that they're trusted and tried and you've got some history with, well, Shakespeare put it better than me. Grapple them to your heart with hoops of steel, because a good shipmate is solid gold, and they ain't easy to find.